Welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, a podcast at the intersection of religion, culture, and politics. I'm Diana Butler Bass, and I'm your host for this episode. I'm joined by my friends, Robby Jones, Kristin Du Mez, and Jemar Tisby. The way that our podcast works is that nobody knows what we're going to talk about in advance. So we give you our honest and authentic responses to topics that we each raise. Today, we're going to do something a little different than we normally do. We want to start by congratulating two of our friends here who have brand new books out. Well, Robby has a paperback release of his older book, and Jemar had a release of his brand new book. And so we want to give them a chance to tell us a little bit about their work for a few moments here, and then we're going to move on to our unscripted topics for the day. So, hey, Jemar, since you're the guy with the brand new book, congratulations, and tell us a little bit about the Spirit of Justice.
Thank you. Thank you. It's called The Spirit of Justice, True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. And it's out September 3rd. So it's available as you're listening to this, wherever you get your books. I want to personally thank each and every one of you, my co-hosts on this podcast, because you all did something special on your Substacks to promote the book. And I'm glad to say it's all over the airwaves, at least in my little circle. It is a book, I think, for our times. I'm really concerned about our resilience in the struggle for justice and what is good and right in the world. We're facing a lot of uncertainty, especially politically, especially in the church, and we don't know what's coming. No one can predict it. It could be better than we expect. It could be worse. But whatever happens, we are going to need the strength, the resilience, even the hope to keep moving forward in the journey of justice. So this book tells about figures from history, mostly Black Christians, who, because of their faith, stood up for justice, stood up for righteousness. And I cannot wait for folks to get some of this history about lesser known people from the past who we should all know about.
And it's a wonderful book. I finally got my copy after I got back from the beach. And so I have just started to dig in, and I have my sticker, Justice Takes Sides.
Yay. Yes, a little
Oh,
swag that came in the kit. Yes, good.
so, and then, hey, Robby, tell us a little bit about the updated version of your paperback release.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll keep it short. But yeah, so it's 1 year since The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future came out a year ago today. And so we have this week, is coming up week, September 10th, is the paperback edition. They did let me put a new afterword in it. So that's always fun when you get to write about 1,500 words, at the end there. And so I'll just tease it a little bit that what I tried to do was to take this long 500-year history of the doctrine of discovery that sets off the whole settler colonial project, the treatment of indigenous people, the kidnapping, enslavement of Africans, all done right in the name of Christ and the church, and connects that up to how does that connect with the modern Christian nationalist movement that we're experiencing today. So that's the work that the Afterword does. I always love that I'm kind of the sociologist here among the historians. I don't get that often to talk about 500-year sweeps of anything, but in the book I was able to do that, and be happy to see that hitting the shelves next week. So thanks.
Great. That's a wonderful book. As a matter of fact, when your book came out last year and I read it, I thought, oh, well, I was going to write something very similar. I better just change everything that I'm going to write for my next book. It took me another year to come up with a proposal that wasn't just rewriting what you'd already written. So I love that work.
Well,
And since the guys both have some cool news, Kristin, what about you? Something new on your horizon as we start the new school year?
Yes, I am squatting here in a colleague's office at the University of Notre Dame. I'm settling in, but haven't yet gotten the keys to my office down the hall.
you can
And
make
so,
copies.
what's that?
You can make copies though.
I can make copies, and
Yeah.
I already rated the Keurig in here, so it's all good. It's all good. It's all I need. So yeah, I'm just in the shadow of Touchdown Jesus here at Notre Dame, and all the memories are flooding back. I went to grad school here. I know, Jemar, you were undergrad here.
I am so jealous right now.
So
Yes. And it's
wild, just
football
walking on
season.
campus. It
Goodness
is. It
gracious.
is. The leaves are turning. It doesn't feel it in the air. It's like in the 80s today. But honestly, as I was pulling up to campus, I all of a sudden my mind was going to beach volleyball and intramural football and swing dancing, all the things I did in the late 90s here as a grad student. So I have to kind of, dig into the social opportunities here for senior faculty fellows and see what I can do. But yes, so shout out to Notre Dame's philosophy department and Center for the Philosophy of Religion for hosting me here for a year.
That's a lot of news that everybody's got. My main news is I'm back from August and that my home renovation is almost finished. So I have a new bathroom that will be part of my life in just a few days. And I'm very happy about that. It's not nearly as exciting as Notre Dame, nor a book release of any sort. But new tile and a new shower is what I've been living for all summer. So this is our first real convocation unscripted of the election season. And instead of going with a single topic, I thought it'd be a fun idea if we went with a sampler today, and that we each just brought up a story that we've seen in the news this week about religion and politics that was interesting to us. And what I hope we can do is begin to sort of point people to, interesting and worthwhile things that they should be paying attention to. And we'll get more focused and we'll go deep as we go along over the next several weeks. But right now we wanted to go broad. And it's been a while since we've been together, all four of us. So I don't know who would like to start. Has anybody got something that's sort of burning on your desk that you want to bring up right away? I feel like calling on Robby, actually.
All right, I'll jump in. Yeah, so
because I know he's got new data and stuff.
well, I did new data, but I've been thinking a lot about abortion and the Republican Party and Trump, right? And just how he has scrambled, the Republican Party on this, and it is so it's really remarkable, right? So it was just last Thursday that he said he was going to vote for the Florida referendum to overturn the 6-week abortion ban in Florida, right? Immediately, there was all this backlash, of course. And he explicitly said, like, I think the time period is too short. We need more than 6 weeks. And then, of course, all the backlash came. And on Friday, 24 hours later, his campaign walked it back and said, oh, no, Mr. Trump will be voting against the expansion of abortion rights in Florida. But he still said, I still think 6 weeks is too short. And he still said this other position that, and by the way, remember, I'm the one who got rid of Roe v. Wade by appointing these justices. And we took it back to the states where everybody agrees that's where it should be. Now, that's not at all the position of the Republican Party, right? For 40 years, the official position of the Republican Party has been a complete national ban on abortion, right? That's been in the Republican Party platform. And I went back and looked again just for, kicks. And it's notable again, it was still in the Republican Party platform in 2016. In 2020, the Republican Party doesn't even put out a platform. They basically just passed a resolution saying, yeah, whatever Trump and his America First agenda is, that's what we're for. And then in this time around, they did this very truncated, bizarre, badly punctuated platform that looks like, cut and paste from Trump's tweets. And it basically says that position, it is like to take it back to the states. So Trump has made the Republican Party no longer the official, quote unquote, pro-life principled party. And what's interesting about it, though, is that it seems to have cost him absolutely nothing. Now, that would have been unthinkable, right? With any other era, any other politician in the last nearly half century. And yet it's pulled it off. And like, I'm kind of been thinking more about it. I'll just kind of throw this out. But I think it is that it's really just ripped the cover off of this, the GOP's maybe worst kept secret, and that it's never really been primarily about abortion anyway.
Okay, that's our first sampler is abortion, and Trump's flip flop
Yeah.
flop and impact on the GOP. So
Robbie, wasn't there a little bit? Well, I saw a little bit of chatter, at least on social media, and just not a fan of Trump's flip-flopping. But I think what you're saying is it's not going to cost him politically. It's not like people are going to flip their votes for this.
No, I mean the elite class has to bark about it, right? And particularly the people running the anti-abortion activist groups have to bark about it. But like, I would bet like whatever you want to put on the table that we wouldn't see any significant movement in the polls among white evangelicals, the rank and file at all, or not a blip over this.
Yeah, I'm not putting a dime on that one, but I believe.
But that's remarkable, right? When you think about
Mhm.
that.
I mean, particularly too, apart from, where the votes are going to fall, rhetorically speaking, for decades now, right? The attacks, relentless attacks that would be leveled against anybody inside evangelical spaces or outside of those spaces who wanted to, and I don't know if nuance is even the right word, but just work through the complexity of a highly complex issue along the lines of, really 20th century history, how evangelicals had long weighed the multiple goods and bads around abortion. When does life begin? Let's talk about ensoulment, theological conversations around ensoulment. The standard approach was, even for those who were anti-abortion, was to absolutely have exceptions for rape, incest, and the health of the mother. And often that was very broadly defined, right? So this is 20th century history, even within the pro-life movement. And then in the 70s and certainly by the 80s, that had just been, off the table. And there is one way to, and this is the world that I grew up in, that the kind of pro-life world, that there is one view that is acceptable. And when you're just pushing for it, like, you don't actually, I don't know if they ever believed they were going to achieve it or not. All the kind of conspiracy theories that it was such a great political issue that you don't actually ever want to win on that. You want to keep that out in front of their voters, keep mobilizing that base, and then you don't have to deal with the complexities of actually passing this complete ban. Well, now we are in an era where we have to deal with those complexities state by state, woman by woman. And it's just fascinating now to hear, when it's politically expedient, some of these voices who absolutely no exceptions, and you are damned if you even, ask a question, asking all kinds of questions and finding all kinds of ways to still justify their support for Donald Trump, and for all of a sudden a nuanced position because it's politically expedient. It honestly, I just can't overstate how dramatic that rhetorical shift is. And I don't know how they ever walk it back.
Yeah.
One of the things that I sometimes thought about with the abortion thing is how that insistence on a complete and total abortion ban that was in the platform, everybody thought, oh, there's no way we're ever going to get that. But there were like the true believers who became abortion abolitionists, as it were. That's what they call themselves even. And I think that this is really intriguing because in the same way in the 19th century, when abolitionists when they got their way, when slavery went away, what it did is it revealed other things about those same abolitionists. And I think that in a sense, we're seeing that with this whole business with Trump and abortion, is that there were some people who really do believe that it's murder and that doctors have to go to prison and women have to be punished and all that kind of thing. But then there's this other kind of person about abortion, and they're showing that maybe I wasn't as sort of clean. My fingers aren't as clean here as what I've always pretended them to be. And so I just think it's interesting that abortion abolition it sort of contains within it some of the same revelatory shortfalls for the people who claimed that they held these views so purely and, without fault. And now we see, this is really kind of messy, and they didn't want us to know the messiness. They just really saw the singular focus on the issue as a good mobilizing strategy, and the difference, of course, is in the 19th century, they're working for a very different cause. So it's not a one-on-one comparison, but I think there's some similarities about it. Once you kind of get what you think you want, then it teaches everybody else something about what you might have really wanted the whole way through. And so I think that in addition to the 20th century trajectory, there's a 19th century trajectory that does speak to where all this is right now.
Well, one last thing I'll throw out on this before we change topics here is, I'm always thinking more and more about, so what is the glue holding them to Trump then, right? Clearly, it's not this. And, I'm just back to, well, it is this vision, right, of a white Christian country, right? That's the thing that's really holding them together, restoring power to white Christians. And he's saying that explicitly on the trail, right? Especially when he's in front of white evangelical audience. He's saying, we're going to bring it back. You'll have power like you've never had before. We're going to bring our religion back, as the way, like that our religion thing is, the biggest tell ever. It's a little bizarre because he was never really, one of them, but nonetheless, that's the move, right? Kind of bringing back power to white Christians is really the thing that's holding them together. And they're willing to let almost everything go, I think, really, if that's the thing they can hold on to.
Yeah, if you go back to 2016, and here I'm afraid to cite polling data with you in the room here, Robby, but status anxiety is a key marker, consistent marker for support for Trump. So it's, restoring this, quote unquote, restoring this white Christian America, this Christian nationalist vision, which is inseparable from the perceived threat of losing status, right? Because who in the culture has the most status to lose? Well, there you have it, right? So it's this perceived loss of status, and that is the glue that holds them to Trump. And it just makes perfect sense of then why his, all of his attributes just make a ton of sense, because if he's going to turn that in defense of their interests, great, more power to him, like quite literally give him all the power, enhance the power of the executive as long as he comes through for us, right? So to heck with democracy, it does not serve our interests right now. Look at that survey data. And so what we need is a strong leader who's going to clear the way for our continuing status, privilege, control.
So, I mean, what I have to contribute dovetails off of this, and I'm very glad. It's kind of refreshing to hear this conversation among this group of scholars and whatnot, because so often in the public discourse, there is a refusal or reticence to name status anxiety, and particularly around race, as a driver of so much of what's happening. And that's what I've appreciated about all of your books, especially your last couple books, Robby. And here's the historian talking about sociology, but I'm going to cite the Public Religion Research Institute, because what I've been pondering the past week or so is the new Census of American Religion that PRRI put out. And it's talking about status, right? So it's really interesting. There are equal numbers of white mainline Protestants and white evangelical Protestants, 13% of the 41% of Americans who identify as white Christians. So it's oftentimes the evangelical Christians that get all the airtime, but numerically, they're identical numbers, which is why I still am pointing people to the discussion that we had about Tim Walz, where we learned so much about Lutheranism and mainline white Protestants.
My people.
Yes, your people, Diana. And then also notably, white evangelical Protestants have experienced the most significant drop in affiliation from 23% of the population in 2006 to 13% in 2023. For many of the same reasons y'all are researching and citing, issues of sexual abuse, narcissism and power abuse, racism, the single issue on abortion, how they treat LGBTQ people, all of that stuff. And the line was, when I was in seminary, when I was in these Reformed evangelical circles, evangelicalism is protected. It's going to grow because we have clear boundaries and strong theology. And apparently that model didn't work. And then just a couple more data. Robby, please weigh in if I'm getting any of this wrong or not explaining it, but I would love to hear other thoughts on it. Obviously, I honed in on some of the other racial elements. More than 7 in 10 Black Americans, 72%, are Christian. 2/3 identify as Protestant generally, and including 38% who identify as evangelical, which is interesting, right? Also, other groups, Hispanic Americans, even more likely to identify as Christians at 75%, and around half are identifying as Catholic, and about 16% who identify as evangelical. Asian Americans, about 4 in 10, 37%, which was the lowest of any racial group, and then about 12% who identify as evangelical. So I just like all of that data, I think is critically important. And then the way I'm thinking about it is, how do churches respond? There's a sense in which we have to do church differently right now because of our politics, because of the legitimate church hurt people have experienced, and this rise in the religiously unaffiliated. And so we actually cited this data on my other podcast, Pass the Mic, and we're talking about, how the big box church model isn't really working for people the same way it did in the early 2000s or before. And they're gravitating towards smaller groups and different affiliations and even non-religious groups. But there's still that yearning for community and belonging that I still think religious communities and institutions have a big role to play.
I'm tempted to send you a copy of Christianity After Religion, which I wrote in 2012. And
you saw it.
that was directly the issue I was going at then. And I think about Robby's data because I was on Robby's board, so I had founding
board member, right?
I know I was a founding board member, and so I had early access to all of that data, and I can't even begin to say how much, as I watched that data come in over those early first years I was on his board, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. And just the way that you structured the question. I mean, one of the things I started saying very early, probably about as early as 2010, is I kept saying this whole thing about having strong boundaries and strong theology, and that conservative churches were going to grow. They were going to withstand all this coming demographic wave. That was a lie. And part of the evidence I looked at was the fact that the Southern Baptist Convention was already in 2010 showing signs of erosion. And they had strong boundaries and strong theology, and they had strengthened both those things in recent years to shore up the institution against that the potentiality of liberalism coming in and decaying the denomination. And it had not worked, and it wasn't working. And it got to a point in the early teens where the Southern Baptist Convention was one of the fastest declining denominations in America. And so I said, it was actually declining percentage-wise faster than the Episcopal Church was. At the same time, the Episcopal Church was ordaining gay bishops. And so the whole thing just made no sense at all. And what you point to, I think, is exactly right, is that people are looking for smaller clusters of belonging where they can really develop deeper senses of intimacy, different capacities of their own identities. And that was just becoming obvious. And there's a lot of other interesting data all around that. And again, this is a historian treading on the sociologist's toes. But Scott Thuma up at Hartford, what used to be called Hartford Seminary, and I can't remember what its name is now. And he's been studying megachurches for years. And one of the things that he discovered probably about 5 or 7 years ago was that megachurches were actually aging, and that the average age in a megachurch is just about the same as the average age in mainline denominations, somewhere between 56 and 58 years old. And so we were looking at just a generational shift that was enormous, and that the denominations, whether they were liberal or conservative ones, weren't ready. And I think that the independent churches were no more ready. And part of it is because of a false narrative about what caused it.
I don't know if you guys got handed this, but there was this, article by Lawrence Iannacone called "Why Strict Churches Are Strong," that was like everywhere, right, in the 90s. It was like the fundamental journal article that was kind of, that it is not aged well, I would say. that thesis.
But it was very useful, right? Very useful to conservatives who had, their own reasons to pull their churches, their denominations to the right, to really, lock down those gates, build up the walls. And so it was very, very convenient. I ran across that. I mean, it really became conventional wisdom inside those spaces for decades now.
And it just doesn't work. And I think part of I've wondered about this, and maybe the three of you have an idea about this, is that there was this promise that was implicit in evangelicalism that Jemar just articulated so well, and that it was going to be the religion of the future. There was even that book that was written by, was it Fukuyama, about how we were moving into a new great awakening, and that it was going to be a different kind of religion, and the evangelical religion was going to be the thing that caused all this new social change. The great, I can't remember what the title of it was. It's back there someplace. But so there was this idea that evangelicalism was going to continue growing, and that it was going to be the carrier of what would become the new American culture. And I think that in effect, it set up conservative evangelicalism for when the decline came. They had no capacity to reflect on the decline, none whatsoever, because it couldn't be their fault, because they had been doing everything right according to all the experts. So whose fault is it? And so they needed a scapegoat. And in 2016, one of the motivating things when Trump was elected, and evangelicals were having some hard time with thinking about Trump in some places. And it was the Sunday before the election that there was a video that Mike Pence did. And in that video, which has disappeared basically from the internet at this point in time, I think you can find it still in the Wayback Machine. Mike Pence actually promised that if Trump was elected, that evangelical churches would grow again. And that video was shown in myriad, I have no idea how many, but myriad evangelical churches on the Sunday before elections. And at the time it happened, there was enough in the media that people noticed it and did think that it had an impact on swinging the sort of fence-sitting evangelicals right at the end of that election season. And so they've really tied Trump to the future of evangelicalism. And that's something that I don't know how many people talk about it, but all of your comments today have sort of pointed in that direction. What is the promise Trump holds? And in part, the promise Trump holds is for this idea of an awakened America where their religion is going to be strong, their churches are going to be big, and they're going to be the most powerful religious group in town. And that's what they had wanted to be for a long time, and thought that that was their birthright. and the demographics, I think the psychological hit of these demographics has been enormous in evangelicalism.
Just to build on that, I think that really thinking about church growth models in evangelicalism is key. If you spend any time in evangelical pastor circles, right, there's kind of two huge industries, the leadership industry and the church growth industry, and they are overlapping. And we could look to Fuller Seminary as a kind of hub for that, but just the logic of church growth, just more has to be done on this and understood on really building this culture of evangelicalism. And it's also linked to, I think you alluded to this, Diana, this idea that, you know, if you're obedient, God's going to bless you, and God's going to bless you with numbers. And that worked well for them. If you start in the 1970s up until, you know, like 1990s, early 2000s or so, you could feel really good about yourself. But also, like, what went into that? It was through homogenous units. So you don't want to have, you know, it's difficult to have interracial churches. Those don't grow very well. People want to be comfortable. This is the Saddleback Sam model, right? So you go for people who have money and stability, because those are the people who are most likely to give to your church and to be able to, you know, to attend church and commit to institutions of this sort. And so that was really the model that was centered in evangelical church growth plans just across the board. And there's this frenetic need to keep building your numbers, right? You're failing as a church if you aren't growing your numbers. One of the things I'm looking into for my next book is going deep back into history to see some of the synergy and deep historical connections between multi-level marketing models and church growth strategies.
Can I make you add shopping, like the big shopping malls into that equation as well?
Right. Throw it all in. It's the same thing. And what happens in MLMs? Incredible initial growth. And then very soon you run out of people in the universe. Like literally you run out of people on the face of the earth, because that growth strategy cannot possibly be sustained. But you need to implement strong measures of control and discipline in order to keep people in a system when the system is failing them. And I just think that's a model we could apply to a lot of conservative white evangelical spaces right now, as their churches are shrinking, as the demographics are changing, and as that evidence of God's blessing linked to this prosperity teaching is no longer there. And this is like all the ingredients for a reactionary movement.
Yeah.
And I can't help but just think, like, you know, most of those church growth models should have just been called white flight models, because they really depended on this exodus of white people to the suburbs. And I mean, who the hell can't grow a church if you got tons of white people fleeing to the suburbs? All you got to do is stake out a corner lot, right? Because there aren't any institutions out there.
I used to use this line when I was doing a lot of stuff around church growth, because mainliners got really attracted to that. They saw that it was quote unquote working. And I tried to get them to not pay attention to it. Instead, I kept talking about, can we develop a church depth model? And so it was a hard sell. But one of the quips that I used to say is, you know, you could move to some of these suburbs and heave a brick out of the window and plant a mega church. Yes. I mean, that's literally how easy it was, especially
Starbucks, right? Yeah,
that's right. Especially in the 1990s and the early aughts. I mean, really, that's all you had to do. And but that's all changed. I mean, that's disappeared like the mall.
Yeah, I think they've got about the same chances of bringing back the mega churches as they do of bringing back the old shopping malls. I think that's right. Yeah.
Well, I just want to throw in one other piece in all of this that I think does sort of continue this trajectory, even though it's our sampler and we didn't decide to coordinate in any way, shape, or form. I've been thinking about the interesting thing that Trump's first running mate was a Catholic, Mike Pence, who became an evangelical, and that his second running mate is J.D. Vance, who was an evangelical who became a Roman Catholic. And I've just been kind of stewing on it. And so I've been reading a lot about J.D. Vance's conversion experience. And today, as a matter of fact, I was looking at an interview that he did in 2016 with Religion News Service. And I was sort of shocked when we're talking about status anxiety early on, and identity and belonging and all these different themes that have played out through this conversation, is that Vance claims that one of the reasons he left evangelicalism is that it was a religion that could not handle upward mobility, which was utterly shocking to me. I think I've got the quote. Here it is. This is a direct quote from a Religion News Service thing. There was a moment when I was like, maybe it is possible to have Christian faith in an upwardly mobile world. And that was after he met Catholics instead of all of the Pentecostals and sort of Baptists of his youth. You can be a member of your faith and still be a reasonably successful person. That wasn't the world I grew up in, but maybe it was true. And that was his response to having Catholic classmates at Yale Law School. And so then he goes on to talk about in the same thing about how the Bible Belt, which was his evangelical home territory and his family's familial religion, he says the other way that religious belief is expressed is not especially good. Now he's talking about evangelicalism, not Catholics. He says faith becomes what I call a cultural tchotchke. It's like something you wear on your breast that you just pin to your identity. It isn't actually significant in a lot of ways. For a fair number of people in these areas, like West Virginia, where he grew up, Christian faith isn't motivating their behavior. It's just an identifier. They listen to country music, live in a rural area, and they like to fish, and they also happen to be Christian. So for a few people, religion is more about what it signifies for their identity as red state Americans than any sort of real belief. That's J.D. Vance on evangelicalism. Well, he also refers to evangelicals as being culturally paranoid, anti-intellectual, and incapable of creating any kind of theology that would create something called the common good. And so he joined the Catholic Church instead, which is a very interesting sociological analysis of the Catholic Church. It kind of runs exactly contrary of the old Niebuhrian vision of the Catholic Church, where the Catholic Church is a broad tent with lots of different classes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Vance sees the Catholic Church as a primarily intellectual movement to forward the power of wealthy people. So.
Wow. It just, all of this is fascinating, Diana. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. And it just makes me think of how important race and region are when we're throwing around terms like Catholicism or evangelicalism, right? These are big tent faith groups. And then, if clearly J.D. Vance didn't grow up in the Saddleback Sam world of evangelicalism, because they would welcome prosperity and put you right on that path and reward you for it with authority and positions of power, right? And sitting here at Notre Dame, I can say that, Catholics also are cool with prosperity. And, right. So, kind of which corner of the tradition are you inhabiting, and which region are you, are you participating in? Like, what defines that? And I think that, get scratched beneath the surface and things get a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting.
And this is clearly interesting. And there were a couple of things that interested me in it. The whole issue of social status I thought was fascinating. It also reminds us of the complexity of Christian nationalisms, is that this is very clearly the Christian nationalism of theocratic Catholicism. And it has some divides in it as well. And it's hard to tell exactly where Vance is. But it does look like he's pretty influenced by integralism and certainly the kind of nationalism that Viktor Orban is promoting out in Hungary. But this is certainly worth watching. And to me, it's kind of fascinating that, what Trump doesn't know anything about religion, really. He picked two religious guys, and they both are sort of Catholic and sort of evangelical. But, I wouldn't put this fella in a room with Baptists. I mean, that seems like it would be a really bad idea. He actually insults the idea that salvation comes through a experience of giving one's life to
Oh,
Jesus.
right. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, ooh, I do want to see him at the Southern Baptist Convention, but
Well, I think they'll be fine with it. Full circle to the abortion issue, right? What's really the tie that binds
Not
them?
about that. Yep.
uh, well, it looks like it's probably race. But it's about power of white guys. I mean, that's and in that article he quotes all the folks who influence him, and it's Saint Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, and there is absolutely no mention of anybody who would be outside of what is the conventional classical great tradition. I mean, there's not even a woman included there. There's no Hildegard of Bingen, or I'm sure he would mention the Virgin Mary under some circumstances as the appropriate image of motherhood. But she did only have one child, according to this version of Catholicism. So who knows what he actually thinks about her. Has anybody else got a final word on Sampler?
So I don't know. I officially brought one up, but mine will be very brief because just starting to get interested in this. But if you followed the story that broke a day or two ago, Department of Justice, right, revealing a lot of Russian money funneled into some conservative media platforms, and kind of seeing where that the tendrils reach. My sense, just a hunch, is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so it's something to keep your eye on and to think about Russian tactics, right? Disinformation tactics and sowing dissent, building divides. I'm struck so often that when I go about my daily life, I get along with all kinds of people, conservative, progressive. I don't even know their politics, but like we're okay with each other. We really are, and we often kind of like each other, right? Our society is holding together in many ways until you get up to this political level and until you get on social media, because then, oh my goodness, right? And just to think about, this is maybe all organic, naturally occurring, that there are operators, and whether we're talking money from Russia, and it's very clear and substantiated that Russia does use this strategy to just try to gin up controversy on all sides, just to pull people apart or make people think that we're pulling apart, maybe more than we actually are. And then I look at the kind of the world that I observe closely, conservative white evangelicals. And I just wonder how much of, the conflicts that are happening on a day-to-day, hourly basis, the outrage that just is constantly there, how much of that isn't, the same kind of tactics. The goal here is simply to sow dissent, to rip people apart, to make people think that we're much further apart than possible. And so I'll just leave that as something I'm going to keep my eye on going forward. As I see where some of that Russian money has gone and what it has been used for, I'm just going to be watching carefully to see who else is acting in similar ways.
Don't you think that's a really good word for all four of us for these weeks ahead? I mean, I've struggled personally as a person who is trying to analyze the environment and speak truth, as well as being a person of faith with the call to not niceness, but kindness and generosity, and just the ability to really love my neighbor as myself, and to try to figure out. I feel like every single day I ask myself that question: how do I hold together those two things? The conversation like we're having today, talking about status anxiety, very direct, to the point, about history and demographic changes and white supremacy and all these different things that it's important to be incredibly clear and truthful about. And then the question becomes, and how do we manifest this in our relationships and the way in which we function in the world on a daily basis. So you guys are shaking your heads, so maybe you're struggling too.
Well, this is kind of a final word from me. I think it's important in the context of recognizing each other's humanity about the another school mass shooting, this time in Georgia, 2 students and 2 adults killed. Um, and obviously there's politics and policy involved in all of this. But these tragedies, unfortunately, are reminders that, at the end of the day, we're all people who want our families to flourish and our schools to be safe and our neighbors to get along. And I think, amid all the convocation unscripted dialogue, I think we all have an accord on that, even as we bring our different perspectives. And hopefully we can continue to recognize the human unity that exists just because we are human beings, even in this very contentious time. So I just wanted to make sure that we mention that in somberness, but also as a reminder of recognizing one another's humanity.
It does seem, Jemar, that some of the people you point to in your book hold those things together so beautifully in their lives. And that's why there are people that I admire too. Well, I think that we have come to the end of today's convocation. Is there any final word, something you want to share with our audience about a place you're going to be speaking or anything else like that? I think we're all going to be having some news upcoming pretty shortly, but we're going to keep it a little secret still, about some things that we might be doing together in upcoming weeks. So in the meantime, thanks for coming to the Convocation Unscripted and enjoying our sampler today. This one was really fun. We had literally no idea where it would go, and it was a good place, I think, to be able to quote that guy who's running for president, weave some very interesting thoughts together, but we hope we actually did it in a much more sensible way than they are sometimes demonstrated on television. And also to be reminded of important things that are facing us. The idea of disinformation, that's a really important place to end, and also a reminder of our common humanity. And so until the next time, we'll see you. Are we going to do once a week, or are we going to do once every other week this fall? Or maybe we haven't decided yet. We'll let everybody know. Keep paying attention. We'll give you a schedule very shortly. That's all for now. Bye-bye.